So, Mr. Theory, what are the guiding principles of the EVCA?
Well, our school motto is truth and virtue uphold the republic. And so those would be the two most foundational principles, seeking truth together and learning how to behave and act virtuously. Now, truth is a word that's not used very often in our culture anymore, modern culture. And by that, we mean seeking the best ideas, the best principles of living, and uh, the facts that we can learn about our world. And so, uh, in order to find truth, you need to train the mind. And one of the things that's distinctively human is our ability to reason. And so at EVCA, we train students to reason. We also understand that you need to reason about something. And so we are very content oriented. One uh, reason why parents bring students to EVCA is for that academic content, where our learning is oriented towards standards and standards of learning, standards of content. And so the students have facts about history, about um, science, the empirical world that they can access to reason about, to reach a conclusion about what is the best idea in a given situation. So, truth is one of the foundational principles. And one of the big reasons why parents bring their students to UVCA is because another way to put it is not all ideas are equal. Even though there's a lot of talk about celebrating everyone's ideas, right? You got to sort of uncritically celebrate everything. We know, even those people who push that know that there are some ideas that aren't as good as others at achieving certain goals, and there are some bad ideas, and everyone knows that. But um, it's becoming less and less fashionable to think about that and to talk about, hey, this is the best idea. We should be promoting this. We believe America's founding principles are representative of and an expression of some of those best ideas. And so we say in our mission statement starts out here at EVCA to preserve our nation's founding principles. And one of those being that, to quote from the Declaration, that all people are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, and that is one of the best ideas. And but we also build that up from first principles. Say, yeah, I can. So, yeah. So we, uh, well, as someone recently put effective, I believe is Dr. Larry Arnn from Hillsdale College. I heard him recently say, America is not perfect, but it's built on perfect principles. And we agree at EVCA. And I think that America's founding principles are worth preserving. And to do that, you need to understand where they come from and what are the challenges that are working against those at the moment. And so, again, examples of truth. And then turning to virtue, again, EVCA motto being truth and virtue uphold the republic. The principles of virtue lead to happiness, is what the classicists believed. Aristotle being one of the early proponents of that idea that if a human is going to be happy, they need to be good and virtuous. And so we explore that. What is good, true, beautiful, but there are objective standards of these things. And we explore how those have been interacted with in history and in literature, some of the great stories of humanity that bring those to the front. What are virtuous people like? And it's not always the easiest path, but we hold to the classical tradition that it's the best path. So truth and virtue uphold the republic. Those are foundational principles that we work off of.
Why was the EVCA conceived in an area with lots of other public schools around?
Well, I'm from the Midwest, and so it's all relative whether there are a lot of them or not, but I get your point that there are other choices, and I think that is one of the beautiful things about and correct things that the state of New Mexico has done in terms of the charter schools division and to their describe themselves as the options for parents division. So parent choice and that I guess called local control, that parents educating their students in the way that they choose. It's a very American democratic idea, and that EVCA is a stark example. I'd like to say shining example as well, due to our successes in many levels, of parents exercising that option to say, yeah, we believe in these principles, and we want our students educated in this way, and we're taxpayers, and so we believe that it makes sense and fits the democratic principles that we can spend our tax money this way. It's, our school is legal, and it's a choice, it's an option, and it's distinctive from the schools in the area. It is a real difference in terms of as what we stand for and what we promote in terms of teaching from the Western tradition, traditional American values and perspectives, citizenship, and so that's why I think I know that's what the founders saw. They saw a need for a type of education that isn't new. It's a return to, we'd say, tried and true methods and perspectives, but it just wasn't available to the public without paying tuition, and arguably just wasn't available at all in this area.
What does the EVCA teach that is different from public schools that makes them better?
Of course, we like to think it's better, and so I would agree that, and even to that, to say we don't think we're just another flavor of education, that if one gives pause and reflective thought, you would say, yeah, this is what we want as a culture. These are the values that are promoted at EVCA actively and intentionally, are the values that made America great, the perspectives that built the country that we all enjoy today, and many feel is at risk because of influences that mitigate against the founding principles. One of the items I would point to, the aspects, is a cultural literacy. There's a lot of celebration of diversity and differences, and I I enjoy diversity and differences. One of my hobbies is learning foreign languages. I've thought to myself over the years, I'm glad there's Chinese and Arabic and Spanish. I like studying those kind of things. It makes it interesting. Um, and I imagine I wouldn't like to live in a world where everyone speaks the same language. What would be the fun in that? But on the other hand, we can't have a nation, right? And there are certain things you have to do together as a group, and government is one of them. As much as self-government is important, but you can't have a nation just by celebrating what's different about people. Um, so a cultural literacy, and since this is America, it's American cultural literacy is one of the things that we um, teach and emphasize, to say, what is it that keeps us citizens in the same country? What are the shared values that we have and the shared perspectives that bind us together as fellow citizens in our social construct that we call America? And we think that together we guard those core values, America's founding principles as well, when we understand our identity, right? That when you come to America, these are the things you believe in. Right? You can have other beliefs, and that's, there's wide freedom for that, but we also have to have some core values that we share as well. And we teach and emphasize those, and they come from the Western tradition. And we're not apologetic about that here. We can't even take credit for it, right? We inherited this great tradition, and believe it's worth, the values of the Western tradition are worth preserving and handing off to the next generation.
What do students typically focus on learning throughout their years in the EVCA? For instance, like kindergarten kind of learns basics and just moving on from there.
Yeah, so the classical education tradition, the classical part has a programmatic element to it as well. We talked about the grammar stage, the logic stage, and the rhetoric stage. And so early in a student's academic and intellectual development and character development, we emphasize the grammar, the grammar school label, where students learn facts, right? They learn literacy and math as their big emphasis, learning how to read, write, express oneself, say accurately, because that's how you best do it, right? So you want to learn how to, you've got ideas, you've got, but you need to be able to express them in a way that's understandable and clear. So have students learn facts in the grammar stage, reading, writing, math, geography, history. Speaking of which, in terms of history, so speaking of history, we do emphasize, try to access source documents as much as we can, so that they're not sort of agenda-driven history or social studies. We try to be careful of that. So we build that up in the grammar stage. In the logic stage, as you get older, you start to think about connections among the facts and patterns. Humans seek patterns and logical connections, and develop those through all the studies, including mathematics, is a prime way recognized long ago by the Greeks to develop the mind to think logically about facts. And then ultimately the rhetoric stage, where you learn to effectively communicate one's ideas and perspectives in a cogent and persuasive way. We do end our curriculum with a moral philosophy class, which I teach, and where the students kind of pull things together and into a thesis which they present publicly as call it the senior project or the culminating expression of their learning, and where they take a moral question that's significant, needs an answer, and they build a case for what they think is the best answer to that moral question in society today. And it doesn't do to in their thesis to say, just to be descriptive and say, well, some people think this and some people think that. Well, I guess we don't know. Just do what you feel like doing. It's persuading them that we believe there's a best answer, and here's what I think the best answer is. Here's what I recommend, and it's not just built on opinion, but it's built from historical precedent and their study of history and literature and science, and they synthesize that together and say, here's why I think that's the best answer. And that's not just the best answer because they think so. They present it publicly, so there's questions. So what about this and what about that? And so we work on refining that answer, but we need a good answer to these questions, and we'd like to have the best answer. I think that serves everyone in the best way.
What are the advantages that EBCA may have over other types of schools?
Yeah, so in moral philosophy, we look at the question of, is there truth? Is there a best way? And you can start from a simple illustration and principle that if something even has a name, then that means we understand and know what the best example of that is, or at least a good example. And for example, if we just take a chair in the room, right? And just by calling something a chair means that there's a definition of what a good chair is. So we can recognize chair from non-chair, right? And we can also test it out and say, based on that definition of what a chair is, we know better chairs from broken ones. And the same is true of humans. To label something and call something human means we know what a good human is, right? And someone must know. It must be knowable. And that's what moral philosophy is about, is what does it mean to be human, and what does it mean to be a good human, a proper human. And so that's, I think, the surpassing value of our education, and anyone who's doing this life. We're not the sole carriers of this, although we're rare in society right now. Our belief is to get back to this fundamental study of what does it mean to be human, to be a good human, and that requires knowing truth and virtue and practicing it. That's the surpassing value of our education, is exploring everything, all knowledge in that context, so that and the true happiness comes from being what you are designed to be as a human, and that not all actions will do. Not all actions lead to happiness and fulfillment and contentment, but only those which fit with what humans are supposed to do, what a good human is supposed to do. And that's our perspective, overriding everything. That's why, take the dress code, for example. Many people have tried the school and left, and it's their choice. It's a school of choice. But one question that often comes up is, why the dress code? Why can't I wear anything I want? And yeah, it's not immoral, we'd say, to dress in jeans. That's not why we don't allow it according to the dress code. But some might say, well, what's the point then? Well, the point is, from the time you get up in the morning, for school, what is your main focus? And the dress code reminds us, we believe, one of its values is that there are things bigger than I am that are going on today. And if I'm willing to be humble enough to be under the authority of that instruction and that development and that teaching, that's how I develop and learn how to be a good human. But I have to be willing to say, there are some things that are more important than me. And we value everyone, but I think to truly enter in and develop that, the first thing you have to be is humble before history, what's gone before, what's been given to you, especially in America, in this great country, of valuing individuals and individual freedom. But with that comes responsibilities. And so we think of our responsibilities first thing in the morning. And what's my responsibility? And you might say that that's kind of a dress code is a simplistic maybe way, maybe so, but maybe that's also part of its power. It's very simple. What am I going to put on? Am I going to challenge authority right now, or am I going to put myself in a posture of humility and learning and dedication to things that will challenge me today? So, an example, an expression of that. But parents who come to EBCA are willing to do that. In fact, they embrace that and say, we'll do that for the value of that. So I'd say that's just the surpassing values, knowing and learning my place in humanity, and that's where the individual truly thrives, not just by expressing their individuality, but knowing the context of what it means to be a human and a citizen of America, for example, and of your local community, and of your family. Families are so important, and we count on the support of families, and so parents see that that's school and family working together to establish that perspective of what it means to be a young person in a family. You're not the leader yet. Just like in the classroom, you're not the leader yet. You've got to qualify for that. And the good news is we know how that can be done well. We learned it from our predecessors.
Alternatively, do you think there are any disadvantages possibly that the EBCA has over other schools?
Well, I've been in public education for 28 years now, and I definitely admit there are limitations to that. Honestly, my wife and I and our family, we have extensive experience with homeschooling and some very good experiences with it. And I could give some details to that. I will say on that line that we didn't have a school choice like EBCA where we were in Indiana, because I think EBCA provides a lot of those same sort of like in a group or a group setting of the same sort of family values that a lot of homeschoolers are looking for, but there are some challenges to public school classroom where you don't always get the individual attention that some people want, and we acknowledge that. But that it's kind of true of any, when you try to take a model and expand it and make it bigger, there are issues of scale that come into play. So that's always a challenge, and you have to, I guess, to use the word, compromise certain things, or at least be willing to say, well, for this greater good, we're going to, if you will, put up with this thing that's not exactly our style or way of doing things. I think the dress code is probably a prime example of that, but some trade-offs. Students aren't allowed to use cell phones during the day. We don't think cell phones are evil. We just think they detract from the learning environment. So, there are restrictions on freedom. Other schools would say, well, we're not going to restrict that freedom. So, um, I guess I wouldn't say that's a disadvantage, but some people may see that as a disadvantage. We have an extensive core curriculum of 25 credits, and so in terms of flexibility of schedule, we're not nearly as flexible as other schools where you can kind of find your own path and say, well, I don't really want to do that much math or science or literature. Um, I want to take more art classes or something like that. That's not our charter. It's not our again to achieve this well-rounded, as you might say, more fully developed perspective of humanity. Even we think like the classics, the classicists, the Saul, Washington and Jefferson and others, or Lincoln, were educated in a classical way, that we expect our students to dedicate themselves to this broad, what liberal arts education, liberal being the free person's education. And that takes commitment. It takes some, putting aside of what I would prefer to do right now. And so some might see that as, some people even say suppressing creativity or that sort of thing. But we think to fully express one's creativity, you need to develop yourself, or you're best served if you develop yourself in a variety of challenging ways, and then see what comes out of that. So, but some would see inflexibility in our core curriculum. We don't have sports teams at the moment. We want to add those. We think sport a very classical idea, and it's a good idea. And we're very appreciative that local districts allow our students to participate in that. We would someday envision fielding some teams ourselves. But right now, that's certainly somewhat of a challenging area.
And if I could add another question to that too, is some people view, as you already said, the dress code is sometimes a disadvantage, but there's also a view that another disadvantage can be there's no buses, there's no lunches, and it's understandably so because the money wants to go to the academics instead. Do you really think that keeps a lot of children away from coming here?
Yeah, if one asks, well, why don't we follow, the standard model of having providing transportation in terms of buses and meals? Big part of that is just trying to simplify the education process and keep costs under control, and to we might say promote keeping responsibility where it ought to be. Not that we're not trying to make it inconvenient for people, but if someone says, well, I've got to feed my kids lunch, and thinking, is that out of the ordinary for parents to feed their kids? It seems a little odd of a reaction, although we've just gotten so used to these sort of things. Or I've got to get my kids, to school. Well, parents get their kids to baseball practice and dance classes and other things that are seen as important, again, is it so odd to say and get them to school? And I know it's in a culture where we're just not used to thinking of it that way. But so it seems like a reasonable expectation for parents to do that. And self-government is one of our sort of watchwords that we want students not to have to be supervised by external rules and forces, but they take responsibility for their own behavior. That's how society thrives best in the end. And so to expect that parents and guardians of the students take responsibility for feeding them and getting them where they need to be seems to fit with that ethic as well. And we certainly are clear that we need that parent support, we need that community support, or someone acting like parents. If the school cannot compensate for that, even if they want to, and we do, we want to help everyone in the system, but taking that responsibility, whether you're a young person or a parent or a grandparent, that is a huge step in the right direction. And so, if we do we think about transportation sometimes? Sometimes we do. Do we provide food for students who come in and say, I forgot my lunch, or it's just difficult? We have parents who provide from time to time some of that, and we distribute that. But we definitely want to promote a culture where each of us is taking responsibility, personal responsibility. And so we see that, again, we don't go out of our way. We don't feel like we're going out of our way to make it inconvenient, but we don't see that as an unrealistic expectation either. And we have carpooling and teamwork there too. And I think that's great. Community working together to get the job done, and to get it done simpler and cheaper. That's one of our goals too, and is to reduce, or see government oversight reduced, and government, putting responsibility on government institutions reduced. We think the less of that we have, the better in a number of ways.
So then, just another quick little question with that. So the emphasis would be more on putting the money to a better use for the children, rather than perhaps saying wasting funds on transportation.
I think that's true, right? That again, the focus being on the education of the student, and the more we can focus on that, the better we are. And of course, where money goes is also where attention and focus goes as well, in terms of time spent on certain tasks. Plus, I gotta say, we love to see the parents showing up at school in the afternoon and talking to each other, and teachers can talk with them. And it's this kind of access is a dream of public schools. So why don't parents come to parent-teacher conferences? Why, I think, but we're used to it. They're used to being on campus. They're used to participating that way and being a part of what we do every day.
Have there been any difficulties for the EVCA to realize its place in the future moving forward?
There have definitely been some difficulties. As I was saying, I greatly appreciate what New Mexico has done. Like I said, I'm a Midwesterner, came here 5 years ago through a Hillsdale College connection. But I greatly appreciate what the state of New Mexico has done in terms of encouraging charter schools. In the Midwestern state where we were behind the curve on that. And I know New Mexico gets criticized for being top on lists that you don't want to be on, kind of thing, and being backward. But I gotta say, I believe they have this one right, and I encourage lawmakers to keep allowing for parent choice and options for parents, and believe that EVCA is a distinctive choice, It's quite different, and I would even interject the term countercultural at this point, a turn back to a former perspective on education, where it was very learning focused and values focused, and like I said, the American, the core values of America, and so, but that turning back to the traditional Western tradition, um, core values, it makes some people nervous, and some of our government officials. Um, Even though I haven't heard them argue against truth and virtue, best ideas and good behavior, for some reason it makes some people nervous that we're giving the power back to the parents, and we're giving these expectations back to the parents, and we're uh, expecting the students to work up to a standard, as we do everything we can, but we can't learn for them, right? And they're best served, we believe, when they do meet that standard of character and academic learning. But that idea of um, living up to a standard, and that's what's acceptable. And if you don't meet it, you got to do it again, and you got work at it. Got to work at it together. You got to work at it yourself. Take individual responsibility to achieve that. Um, is an idea that has been not fully supported in our culture. I guess I'll put it that way. And even though I think even the critics of it, they understand the value of it, but for some reason we've lost the conviction that this is best for ourselves and our students and the next generation that is holding to these values. But we believe that you've got to. That's just a fact of reality. That without personal responsibility, you can't succeed as a culture, for example. But actually walking that out, it makes makes a lot of people nervous, and so like somehow we're overlooking people in need, for example, or we're not taking care of the people around us. We think we are. We think it's the path to the best kind of care for everyone around us, when we're all encouraging one another and expecting one another to take our personal responsibility seriously. And yeah, we help people out, but not. You got to be careful what you depend on, because some things are more sure than others. And, so personal responsibility is very big, but that makes some people nervous, and so like as if we don't care about certain elements of the population. I think our record shows we do, and people who visit see we're doing the things that look that are caring, and we're seeing success of all the students that come. But we have been definitely challenged by the PEC, some members of the PEC who tried to shut us down. But we believe that EVCA is worth fighting for, and what we're doing as an option for parents. Sure, one we'd like to spread, because we believe in it strongly, strong enough to invest further in succeeding in the face of challenges. And our student population is increasing. More parents are seeing, you're right. That's what we want. So we think it ought to be an option for parents. If they didn't want it, they wouldn't choose us. And so there have been challenges, but any good thing never goes unchallenged. We know that from the very founding of the country. Right? But we're glad that America is a place where we can openly challenge things. And we've been challenged, and we've challenged back, and we trust that in that process, if we're behaving responsibly and reasonably and according to correct principles, then what's right will come to the surface. And I think it is right that we are here as an option for parents.
Okay. How has the EVCA rated against some of the other schools in New Mexico? For example, I know you have the banner out there with the A+ school.
Yeah.
I was curious. Yeah, that's obviously a huge achievement, and I was just curious how does it feel to be, I would say, better than most schools. Honestly, that's definitely good at showing that.
Yeah, well, one of our goals is primary goals is academic achievement. We said self-esteem through meritorious achievement is in our charter, right? That we want kids, I guess, to be awesome because they have achieved, and that I think that's the best way to feel good about oneself is because you are behaving well and you're productive, right? And you have something that you do and you do well and you enjoy it, and you're something that's real. And so it is it's satisfying. We expect to do well on say state testing because as much as that does reflect real learning and is content oriented, we would see that our students will show up well on those kind of tests. We have bigger goals, but we also expect that if we're doing our job well, and if the tests are, as I say, designed to measure real learning, content, knowledge, and ability to reason and think about that. And I think at this point they are, for the most part, and so our students can do that task as well as other things. So yeah, definitely pleased to see that.
How did it feel to have won the charter certification after how does it feel to have won over the charter certification and Department of Education to get yourself a longer charter time?
Mm-hmm. Well, we were, I would say, personally, mostly encouraged that in America and New Mexico, there is continued opportunity for this kind of local control and I guess control over one's own destiny and I'm thinking of parents, not so much as, well, we, the administration or the governing council, we won because we got what we wanted. We did, but we wanted this for the parents' sake. We wanted to see and to win because we believe it's important that individual citizens can have this type of control over their own lives and the lives of their families and their own children. And because we believe that, again, we're not bad people. We're not, as reflected in being, say, illegal, or we're trying to do something that's bad for people and subversive in any way. And so we thought this, like the CSD that supported or gave a recommendation that we be rechartered all along, we agreed with that. That by all accounts, really, we're meeting our obligations. We're responsible. We're providing a good option for what parents, a significant number of citizens of New Mexico want. And that's a good thing. We believe it's a good thing, and it ought to be allowed. And so it was very encouraging to see that in the end, that's what happened. The Secretary of State's office did reverse the decision and say there are no grounds upon which, no constitutional grounds, no ethical grounds, no legal grounds upon which to close down the school. And so we ought to be free to do this. And that is a big victory for the people of the state of New Mexico and ultimately America, because some people who disagreed and thought they had the authority and even, I guess, in their own minds, the responsibility to shut us down when facts really weren't in their favor. It didn't happen. One day I'll be wrong and I should be shut down, or at least that initiative. If I'm trying to do something bad or wrong, I shouldn't be able to do it. And I hope there are people around me who will convince me of that or make, force me. But if you're doing the right thing, you have to be allowed to continue.
I know it was a huge weight off our shoulders because we didn't want our children to go back to the other schools because of that. We were willing to homeschool them, of course, and because if the school had been lost, it would have been, I think, a big blow to the community, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
What does the EVCA hope to accomplish with the time and funding they have been given, specifically like with the new building and such?
Yeah, so in my experience, in my view and study, one conclusion I've come up to is that sometimes doing the right thing and doing the best thing is just persevering, just continuing with what we know is right. I know in a progressive mindset, there's a lot of emphasis on doing something new and different, and that if you're doing the same thing 5 years from now that you're doing today, somehow you've missed the point of living and the point of humanity, and you're not, quote unquote, modern, as if that's the ultimate measure of being successful at living. But I think in parenting, for example, and in learning, and there are certain principles that are always going to be the best. Certain practices that are always going to be the best. Take, for example, the principles that underlie this civil dialogue, right? How we got to have this facility, and how we got to the point of knowing how to be respectful one to. These are all just based on fundamental principles that we usually take for granted, but we do notice when they start disappearing, and there's trouble, around Albuquerque, right, with increasing sort of lawlessness and things like that. Well, we start to see, well, what's going on here? Well, we believe you have to return back to the first principles. What were we doing as a society back when there was, a better feeling about things, right, and a better experience, and so just being steady and upholding those principles from generation to generation is a success in itself. And so to have structures in place that facilitate that steady preservation and cultivation and passing on of those principles to the next generation, that's a big assist to have a permanent presence, just like we want certain values to have a permanent presence in our society. Like everyone's created equal. We need to treat them and make our decisions based on that non-negotiable principle. What, 5 years from now, is that going to be different? No. I don't think anybody believes that. No matter how progressive someone is, I don't think they want that to change. I haven't heard that they do. And so we totally agree. And there are a number of principles that don't change. And that's what forms our learning community here, and we're based on that. And so to have a permanent presence and an expanding presence to promote those principles, those timeless principles, as we've discussed some already. I think that's a very good thing. And so we also, I can see expand. We have a number of people in the community and parents who sit in on a class. We get to talking about some of the content that we do and think, well, I'd like to sit in on that. So I see our new facility making a way to have the community more involved in the teaching and learning at EVCA. And I know sports are probably the primary way that the community gets involved with the school in the way sort of what we might call the traditional public school has played out in our culture over the last 50 to 75 years. But I can see also a school where learning is also something that attracts, and having seminars in the evening and talking about the issues of the day and reasoning through them and thinking, what are the best decisions? What's the best way to go? And having EVCA be a center of that kind of perspective as well, of learning and sharing with the community and having the community involved in that kind of thing. I have a vision for us being a center for that and being known for that as well.
What do you visualize for the future of the school, say, in the next 5 years, 10 years?
Yeah, again, it's a steadiness, a perseverance. That's one of our pillars of character, persevere. And upholding standards of right, upholding the standards, academic standards, and that's our big charter goal. And we think also our big mandate in terms of why we exist. So we see a steady, even with classical in our name, that means we're not, we're dedicated to maintaining more than changing. And again, maintaining according to first principles of good living and happiness, which is based on good living. So, and an accurate knowledge. So what, looking forward, I think just being a pillar. I would say pillars of character because pillars aren't supposed to move, right? So it's a solid foundation. Something in the community that upholds standards of citizenship and learning. In terms of growth, we think we're aiming for about 700, and if there are more than that, then I think we need to spawn a new school, because some of these issues of scale don't work as well when you're trying to create a certain type of learning community. It's if you get too big, then you lose that certain elements that are required to be able to keep track of everyone, right? To know all your students. And call the learning family, I guess, is I've seen some big families that they're pretty clever in how they so I don't know if I could have kept track of 8 kids, some friends we had, but having just three kids ourselves. But so in terms of issues of scale, we have a target number and don't expect to keep growing bigger and bigger, but to say that we just need to make another house. We do hope to improve our campus with athletic fields eventually, and that sort of thing. I think a lot can be learned through sports, a lot of good lessons. I'm a big fan of sports myself. Not a fanatical fan, but definitely I deeply appreciate the role of sports in culture. And the Greeks did too, Romans did too, they saw that. but we do still want to keep self-governance and individual responsibility intact, as a priority, and also very efficient use of taxpayer funds. And to be careful, very careful how we use funds, and that we direct them almost entirely to the learning goals that we have.
That's all the questions I have. If you have any other additional comments you'd like to make.
One thing that continually comes up back to parent involvement is volunteerism. And so any sort of a chance I can get to say, we need to work together on projects. We invite parents to come in. We need parents to be involved. Like any school does, but it seems like for some reason we particularly maybe we just have a big variety of projects, but our foundation, for example, that does fundraising barbecues and raffles to try to raise awareness and support for the school. But then we have dances, we've got, trying to think of some of the things, talent shows, but even concerts. We have a concert, we just need a lot of community involvement, maybe because some of our ambitions require that, but also because we're new. We don't have traditions built in terms of, well, here's, our money for the prom always gets raised this way, or looking at trying to think what's coming up. Well, we have a Renaissance fair, which brings people together, and it's been really a big hit. But when you start something new, you get a lot of people on board to find out what it's all about. But then once it happens, kind of gets out, well, I guess this is just going to happen. It's been great. I don't know how it happens, but I guess it does. But to just keep in mind that we really need parent support for initiatives. And as we move to the new building and make some transitions, we're always going to be new opportunities. So parents, just if you understand, please, if you see an appeal for some help, try to think about if that could be you. If you think, yeah, I should do that, I like doing that, that could be fun, then please follow up. Don't let that thought go. I know everything isn't going to be your thing, but if it strikes you as something, please follow through. We need you.
Any other comments, sir?
No. I think your questions were quite thorough. I could make a point that we are affiliated with Hillsdale College. A lot of people are interested in that. Hillsdale's a unique institution that shares the values. It's why they joined up with us as a mentor 6 or 7 years ago now. In terms of limited government and personal responsibility and personal freedoms and personal responsibilities. And so many will recognize the name of Hillsdale College, and yes, we are closely associated with them, and they're a big assist to us, training teachers, and they're just here for a visit. Ended yesterday. This is their spring visit. Very helpful at observing the program and trying to keep us on mission. It's easy for a school or anyone to drift off their mission with all the pressures pushing and pulling, and sometimes it really is painful to make a decision that's unpopular. Even if it's unpopular for just a very small segment of the school's population, it's difficult and it's hard to resist compromising and saying, why can't we just make everybody happy? But they also help us stay on mission. Say sometimes you got to dig in for the greater good and do something that's not your first choice or even seems outrageous. Or at the tactic, oh really? You've got this in your policy. You're surely not going to enforce that to the So to have an outside entity encouraging and saying, we go around the country looking at schools, and this works. Stick with it. Be committed. So we appreciate that, and we appreciate when parents are willing to say, to think with us, say for a greater good, I'll give up this preference that I have, right? Or come to the governing council and say, can we dialogue about this? But to do that in a civil way, and I congratulate our community, parent community, on that. I think, especially where we are now, that those who are most committed to the values we stand for are very helpful that way in saying, yeah, we committed to this. We believe in what we're doing here. We'd rather have it this way, but we're gonna support the school. Or if we're after reflecting on it and thinking about it, I really want to see a change here, come to the governing council and ask for present your case. So I think it's been, I've seen a growing trend over the 5 years I've been here that's become more healthy and healthier. Less than fewer and fewer people just coming in and being upset. But even if they are, saying, well, let's talk about it. So I see trust building in our community over the years, and I think that's a testimony to everyone, and a testimony most of all to our principals. They really do work when you trust them and dedicate yourself to them. And we used to call these basic principles, but they're not so basic anymore.